Over the histories, the world of Arda has played host to a vast array of creatures over the many ages of its history, some large and some small, some good and some made from the purest evil known. Some creatures were so grim and destructive that they changed the face of the world forever, or reaped untold destruction on the forces of good through the many great battles of the world, some shaking it to its very foundations, or ripping the world apart entirely. Today we'll delve into the 8 most evil creatures that Arda and Middle Earth have ever known, who have reaped untold misery on the powers of good in the world over the ages. Greetings all, I'm your guide, the Archivist. Today I will delve into the 8 of the most evil creatures that Arda has ever known, what their impact was, and what truly made them so horrific. Ungoliant, the mother of all spiders. Ungoliant, the mother of all spiders, is one of the most terrible creatures to ever exist in Arda and later Middle Earth. Existing since the very beginning of the world itself, her true origin is unknown even to the Valar, but it is said that she is made of the darkness of the void itself. While she could have been a powerful Maya, since the Ainur passed through the void to reach Arda, there were very few among them with such dark a countenance as Ungoliant, who was perceived in her spirit form to be wreathed in darkness at all times. She was often an ally to Melkor, later known as Morgoth, who was the first Dark Lord of the world, and reaped some of the worst blows against the forces of good in known history. It is said that she strangled all passing light and fed on all light in the world she could find, ever hungry to consume more of the world's brightness. Her alliance with Melkor led to the destruction of the 2 trees of Valinor, draining them of their power, along with the wells of Varda. This also allowed Melkor to steal the Silmarils, jewels of huge importance and power from the Valar, dealing a huge blow to them culturally and spiritually. Throughout these events she grew into a monstrous bloated size, and her hunger continued to grow. She even turned on Melkor to steal and consume the Silmarils, such was her lust. But Melkor's band of Balrogs drove her away, and she spent much time in Middle Earth, spawning spiders before either consuming herself in her lust or vanishing into the Southlands. Gothmog, the first lord of the Balrogs. Gothmog, the first lord of the Balrogs of Melkor's army, was a formidable embodiment of darkness that reaped great destruction and death on the forces of good, being involved in many key battles for Melkor, also slaying 2 High Kings of the Noldor. Not to be confused with the Captain Gothmog from the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, who was an orc. Gothmog from the First Age was a Balrog, a powerful Maiar who sided with Melkor in the early days, along with the other Balrogs, and together they led many successful campaigns against the elves, leading to huge victories against the forces of good in this period of time. Being a Maiar, Gothmog wielded a huge amount of power, and was trusted by Melkor as one of his advisors and also one of his greatest generals during the campaigns defending Angband and also assaulting Gondolin and the other elven realms. He was personally responsible for killing Feanor, the High King of the Noldor, a major player for the forces of the light at this time, and also killed Fingon during the Nernath Ananadiad, also known as the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Great periods of sorrow were inflicted on the elves at the hands of Gothmog's leadership. He was eventually slain during the fall of Gondolin. Through Morgoth's victory over the elves that would be completed here, Gothmog would be slain by Ecthelion as they fell into the Fountain of the King, and Lungorfin, second of the Balrog lords, would also be slain by Glorfindel. Ancalagon the Black. Ancalagon the Black was a dragon of immense size and power, bred by Morgoth during the First Age as a final weapon against the forces of good falling upon him in the climax of the First Age and on the eve of defeat of the Dark Lord. It is well known that Morgoth spent many centuries breeding and creating all manner of creatures in the deep depths of his second fortress of Angband, which was laid deep into the Iron Mountains beneath the peaks of Thangorodrim, 3 massive active volcanoes. In these pits many notable creatures and characters were brought into the world by Morgoth, but one that has touched the histories with its magnitude and violence was Ancalagon, who was said to be so vast that he made the many mountains look small, and when he was eventually defeated at the peak of the final battle, he completely broke and destroyed Thangorodrim, as the world started to fall apart. Ancalagon was unleashed during the final battle of the War of Wrath, after Eärendil went to Valinor to implore the help of the Valar to defeat Morgoth, after the near total destruction of the elves of Middle-earth at this time. The Valar came in great numbers and bore down on Angband with a mighty siege. Facing complete defeat, Morgoth unleashed one of his final weapons against the forces of the light, which were his winged drakes. Ancalagon was a terrible force and reaped countless deaths upon the host of the Valar, but eventually, after days of fighting, Ancalagon was thrown down by the Eagles of Manwë, led by Eärendil, also marking the end of the battle. So terrible was this event that the world changed shape. Carcharoth the Red Maw. Carcharoth the Red Maw lived in the First Age, a great werewolf and one of the greatest of his kind. He influenced events significantly during this period. As the guardian of the gates of Angband, he slew countless enemies who approached the gates, and it is said none would pass him save for weight of power alone, and would need cunning. Morgoth bred and reared Carcharoth himself, imbuing him with much evil intent and power, giving him the purpose of countering the legendary wolfhound Huan, given powers by the Valar. Carcharoth played a role in the tale of Beren and Luthien, who stole into the fortress after putting Carcharoth into a deep sleep and took possession of one of the Silmarils. However, when they tried to escape, Carcharoth awoke and bit off Beren's hand, along with the Silmaril which fell into his great maw. Being of the dark, the Silmaril burned at Carcharoth, and whilst he was imbued with power, it drove him wild with madness, and burst from Angband through the land, slaying all in his path through Beleriand. Eventually he was hunted and killed by Huan, along with a host of elves and men, but Huan was also killed in the process by Carcharoth's poisonous bite. The Fell Beasts. When we think of the iconic beasts that portray pure evil and horror in the world of Middle-earth, the Fell Beasts are usually near the top of the list for most people due to their heavy appearance in The Lord of the Rings, inspiring fear and pure terror into the hearts of the men of the West, and appearing to play a key role in the battles that surround Minas Tirith in The Return of the King. The Fell Beasts are large flying creatures, similar to a wyvern, with no feathers and long thin necks, sickly skin, and their bodies give off a dire stench. All of the Nazgûl of Sauron rode them after their black steeds were swept away at the ford of Brunion. These beasts truly are made of the horror themselves, and were always described as with a grim expression. Gollum describes them after a sighting in the dead marshes as wraiths on wings, and when the Fellowship saw one of them after they were camped in the Anduin, it was described as a great winged creature, blacker than the pits of the night. They are used heavily by Sauron during the War of the Rings, and feature mostly during the siege of Osgiliath and Minas Tirith, routing the defenders with relative ease, having little to counter the terrible onslaught from the skies. The Witch King of Angmar rode a fell beast before his defeat at the hands of Éowyn, where she cut the head off his beast. The remaining fell beasts would survive until the destruction of the ring, where in their attempt to reach Frodo at Mount Doom, they would meet their end during the eruption and complete destruction of Mordor. Durin's Bane. Durin's Bane, one of the most iconic creatures in the history of Middle-earth, was a Balrog of Morgoth that escaped the final destruction of the War of Wrath, and found refuge hidden deep below the dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Whilst this Balrog's original and true name are not known, like the other Balrogs, they were a Maiar that existed before the true world of Arda began, in a similar ilk to the wizards of Middle-earth. Eventually Melkor corrupted and turned the Balrogs to his side, and it's likely that Durin's Bane persisted and fought across all the battles of the First Age until the ultimate defeat of Melkor in the War of Wrath. However, Durin's Bane escaped and laid in wait under the mount for ages. It persevered there, wreathed in shadow until the Third Age, 1980, where it was roused by Durin's folk mining greedily and deeply into the mountain in search of mithril, a valuable and extremely useful metal. During that year, Durin the Sixth was slain by the Balrog, and his kin were forced to leave the mountains because of its wrath. This is where this particular Balrog garnered its name Durin's Bane, and it again waited there in shadow. This was until that fateful day the Fellowship stumbled upon it, and Gandalf battled the great creature on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. Whilst Gandalf cast the bridge asunder and felled the Balrog into the blackness, the Balrog's whip cast a snare on him, and he was dragged into the inky darkness as well. They fell into the very bottom of the mountain and fought for many days and nights, until Gandalf eventually smote him onto the side of the mountain at the peak of the Endless Stair from Durin's tower, and Durin's Bane was slain. Being a Maiar, Durin's Bane was not truly killed, but it's unknown what became of its spirit beyond this point, just like with some of many of the other Balrogs who, like Sauron, would have survived physical death. Smaug. The tale of Smaug is one of the most well known in the archives of Middle Earth, being one of the key antagonists in the story of Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit. Smaug was a fire drake living in the Third Age and considered to be one of the last great dragons alive in Middle Earth at this time. Most fire drakes were killed or wiped out during the War of Wrath in the First Age, including Ancalagon the Black, the largest dragon ever to have lived. Dragons have a deep lust for wealth and jewels, coveting them with an unparalleled desire, and the horde amassed in Erebor during the reign of King Thrall became an intense desire for Smaug to take for himself. In one foul and grim swoop, he nearly completely destroyed the nearby city of Dale and took the Lonely Mountain and the horde for himself, leaving the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain to be pushed into exile. Smaug at this time in his life was able to deliver much misery onto his enemies, being of enormous size compared to most beasts of this period of history. He would have been comparatively small to many of the great dragons of the First Age, but during this time he was virtually unchallenged altogether. He lived under the mountain virtually uncontested for almost 2 centuries before the tale of the Hobbit transpired, and he was awoken from his dreamlike slumber. In his rage, he took his fury out on the local lake town and nearly destroyed it entirely before finally succumbing to a black arrow from Bard the Bowman. Glaurung, the first fire drake. When we look at the histories for the most evil creatures of Middle Earth, perhaps one of the greatest ones of all is Glaurung, the first fire drake to exist in Middle Earth. Whilst he was flightless, he was incredibly fearsome, the first dragon created by Morgoth and considered to be the progenitor of all dragons thereafter. Glaurung was bred and created by Morgoth after realising his orc armies were not enough to truly combat the Noldor during this time, who were giving him untold grief in his battles against them. His fury and terror was so great that he broke the sieges of the Elves of Angband many times, and led the Orc and Balrog hosts to a great victory during the Dagor Bracolach. Glaurung brought more terrible destruction on his foes during the Nirnaeth and Eodiad, where he sired a group of lesser dragons to command as well. Such was the force of their power that they completely routed the elves and men of the light at this time. Glaurung truly was mighty during his later years when he was fully grown, and was only eventually defeated by an ambush from the legendary elf Durin, who stabbed him through his soft underbelly. Neanor came to him thinking he was dead and cast herself into the river, only to discover his beloved had perished, and fell on his own sword himself, leading to all of their deaths. And so I have now covered the content for this video, but if there's anything that has been missed, please share them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to like the subscribe and like Waystones down below. Na Luea Govanadvan, until we meet again.